Ram raids, ram raids, ram raids. National wants to put our kids in military camps, and up until recently, Today FM had a whole section dedicated to ram raids. The reporter even referred to it as terrorism. This mass media obsession is a classic tactic used by government and industry to justify increased surveillance, policing, and imprisonment. They rely on racist and classist stereotypes to keep us constantly blaming each other for the problems created by a small gang of greedy billionaires, ram-raiding us into poverty and disease. National and media outlets did this with gangs, and Labour passed a hyper-militarized anti-gang policy paper, which Treasury criticized for potentially breaching human rights. Now they're doing it to vulnerable children that we, as a society, are failing. These young, poor, and often brown kids, rebranded as youth offenders, are acting out against a violent capitalist state that's making them poorer every day in a material and spiritual way. Instead of reflecting on its flaws, a colonial state prefers to project blame onto its victims, often re-traumatizing them. And that's the sad history of the mongrel mob gang, who grew out of boys' training centers in Levin and Ipuni, where children suffered physical, sexual, and mental abuse from the state. The prison industrial complex is built on the premise of punishing the visible trauma of the system. That's why 77% of our prisoners are victims of abuse themselves, and why almost all of our prisoners come from poverty, mental illness, or drug addiction. When Tova O'Brien likened these ram raids to terrorism, she was ignorantly pointing to the glaring similarities between these two narratives. Just like the US, the world's biggest terrorists use the terrorism category to justify war on Middle Easterners, the ram raids discourse, made up by the capitalist powers impoverishing us, is used to justify the ongoing war on the poor. Both of these categories rely on and reinforce the pre-existing fear of brown people. National wanting to reprogram kids invokes ideas of civilizing the savages, much like the US taking democracy to the backward Arabs. And both of them point to a symptom as far away from the initial cause of the harm as possible, keeping our attention away from the real sources of power. The political and legal system which enables the minority wealthy class to continue exploiting all of us. Over the last few years, New Zealand experienced the biggest wealth transfer in recent history, thanks to Labour's classist COVID response. Half of our population is being forced to survive on just 2% of all the wealth in this country, while working our lives away for hoarders who make their mountains of wealth through exploiting humans, non-humans, and our ecosystem. And every day, our ability to live with and be nourished by nature is being diminished. To deflect from all of this, our oppressors use fear and racism to keep us anxious, distracted, and in a constant cycle of trauma. It's especially disappointing from so-called journalists who are meant to hold power to account, real power, and instead they're picking on poor children. It's shameful. Kia ora koutou katoa, thank you for watching. I hope you got something out of that video. If you'd like to help us keep doing this full time, please consider supporting us on Ko-fi. Like, share, subscribe, all that good stuff, and until next time, whawhai tonu e te iwi.